Hello everybody! Today I want to talk to you about a simple introduction to skills-based grading. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. I want to talk to you about the simple way that I started skills-based grading. My grading categories used to be pretty standard. I had tests, quizzes, assignments, participation, and labs. First of all, if you haven't seen my video on why we should never have participation as a grading category, check that out. Moving on. Okay, so those sound about right. You know, we're used to that. Tests, quizzes, assignments, labs, participation. And what would happen is a kid would take a test, I'd put that in the test category. Kid would take a quiz, put that in the quiz category. And a student would have a B, another student would have a B. Maybe a student didn't do so well on quizzes. Maybe a student did well on tests. I wouldn't really have a complete picture of why students had the grades that they had. Once I started skills-based grading, I could have much better conversations and I know how to help the students. So skills-based grading is having grade categories that relate to a skill, not saying like tests or assignments. Let me tell you about my categories. And I'm not saying these are the best categories. These were the simplest categories I could come up with that could give me a narrative about a student. I plan on coming up with better categories, but until I do, these are the ones that I'm using. And so my categories are terminology, application, and products. I didn't want to have too many categories, so I just have 3. It seemed like 2 categories wasn't enough and 4 was too many. So terminology, application, and products. I teach life sciences, and when we learn life sciences, there's a lot of vocabulary that's included. There's a language that we have to learn. And so on my assessments, there is a lot of questions where it's just memorizing a term. And so for that, that's terminology. Now, I don't want my entire class to be memorization. That is terrible. I want you to really understand the science, and that's where I have application. And so I will give students 2 tests at the same time, one called terminology, one called application. The terminology questions might be fill in the blank. It might be asking you the difference between 2 different words. Basically, it's vocabulary. So the students have to study and memorize these vocabulary words. That's terminology. Now, my application quizzes and tests, the students have to explain. It's a narrative. They have to apply the concepts and things that we learned in class in order to solve a problem or answer a novel question. And these are hard quizzes and tests to come up with. And it requires a lot of reading on my part. So the students are given a question, a scenario, and they have to take the science that we learned in class and explain it. So explaining is application. And so they'll get 2 different grades. They'll have a terminology grade and an application grade. Products are anything that they turn in. So if there's an assignment that they turn in, that's a product. My labs are currently a product. So why do I call it a product? A lot of times we have assignments like labs where the student just has to do it. Now, I'm hoping they understand it. I'm hoping that they learn from it. But could the student just write down everything that they needed to write down and turn it in without knowing what they're writing about? Yeah, unfortunately, that's possible. I'm hoping that's not the case, but it is possible. So anything that they just do in class and turn in, I call a product. For my marine biology and zoology classes, they do a sketchbook. And so by doing that, I'm calling it a product. Because I don't know if they're doing application or terminology or if they're just doing what they're supposed to do. Okay, so those are my 3 grades: terminology, application, and products. Now let's take a couple students, these are true cases in my class, and look at the narrative of these students. Let's start with 2 B students. So I have a student that is a B. They have a C in terminology, they have an A in application, and an A in products. So I look at them and I have something to talk to them about. If a parent asks me, why does my student have a B? I can look at this and say, well, they have an A in application. It means they're understanding all of the concepts we're talking about in class. They have an A in products. They turn in everything they're supposed to do. Now the C is in terminology, which means the student is not memorizing. They're not studying the vocab. They're probably not doing their studying at home. They might be a very bright kid who understands all the concepts in class, but then when it's time to go home and study the vocab, they're not doing it. So I can have that conversation. This student needs to practice their vocabulary so that way their terminology grade will go up. Now let's look at the other B student. I have a student that has an A in terminology, a C in application, and an A in products. Well, those students both had a B, but for different reasons. This student has an A in terminology, which means they're great at memorizing things. They probably go home, they do their flashcards, but they have a C in application, which means they're really struggling with explaining the concepts. So this means they're not fully understanding what it is that we're talking about in class. And then again, an A in products, which means they're turning everything in. Now, this scenario is more common when I have my freshman students because their previous science classes, a lot of times, in order to get a good grade, all you had to do is memorize the content. And so I get students that come to my class ready to memorize everything, but they can't explain what they're learning. And so I coach them and they learn how to explain and apply the science that we're learning. But I can have that conversation with the student and the parent. I can say, look, your kid is doing a fantastic job at memorizing the science, but they can't explain it. We're gonna have to work on that. And then I get students that get an A in terminology, an A in application, and an F in products. They're just bad at turning things in. And so we can have that conversation. They're not doing what they're supposed to do and they're not turning in, but they are studying, they're memorizing their vocab, they understand the science, they just need to start turning things in. And so by having skills-based grading, it has allowed me to give better feedback to students, have better conversations with parents, and know how to help the student. I can have them study in ways that will help improve their scientific understanding based on the categories that they are struggling with. If you are interested, if this sounds great to you, I highly recommend looking up skills-based grading because there are some fantastic categories out there. Again, I'm not saying that my categories are the best. This was my intro into skills-based grading, and this is how I got my foot in the door. And so far, it has been fantastic. I recommend it. All right, everybody, I will talk to you next time.